Hello, everyone. My name is Griffin Shaulis. I am one of our financial aid counselors here at Pacific University, and this video is going to be a brief overview of completing the 2025-26 FAFSA. So we're going to look at going through the screens on the form and how to fill it out, whether you are starting off going through the student section or the parent section, or if students are going to be completing it independently as well. So we'll go through all the different screens that you're going to go through, some important information to know as you get this FAFSA filed, and then some next steps as well for financial aid on our end. So we're going to jump right in here with the FAFSA form, or the free application for federal student aid. The free application for federal student aid, or the FAFSA, will collect demographic and financial information for both the student as well as the parent for students who are going to be considered dependent for FAFSA purposes. Information on the FAFSA is used to calculate what's called the Student Aid Index, which is a figure that will get spit out on the other end after students complete that FAFSA. And then from there, colleges will use the Student Aid Index, or the SAI, to determine what financial aid can be offered both on the federal, potentially state, as well as institutional side. The FAFSA is available in both English as well as Spanish. The FAFSA can be filed at any point throughout the academic year. However, typically it's not going to be available before October 1st of the current year. The 2025-26 FAFSA is now currently open, so students and parents can start getting in and filling out that FAFSA for the next academic year, starting fall 2025. One thing to note when you're working with colleges is that some schools will set FAFSA priority filing deadlines. So make sure you're either communicating with the admissions or financial aid offices at those schools to get an idea of what their deadlines might be in regards to FAFSA, if any. Some schools won't have any, but always a good idea to check to see if any have deadlines for incoming student FAFSA receival. There are going to be two ways that students can complete the FAFSA. First is going to be online using ideally a laptop, and then also students can fill out a paper FAFSA using just a PDF form that you can print and then fill out all of the information that can get entered online. As a financial aid administrator, I always default to encouraging students to fill out the FAFSA online. There are a bunch of different benefits to filling out the FAFSA using the online form. The main ones being that there are going to be built-in edits in the online form to prevent errors that can potentially happen on that FAFSA for students who aren't filling it out through the online system. Next, there's also going to be skip logic built into the form online, meaning that if there are certain things that you do not need to fill out, the online FAFSA will know that. So it'll allow you to save time versus the paper FAFSA form. You might potentially fill out sections of the form that aren't really applicable to your situation. Also, with the online FAFSA, there's no need to manually enter federal tax information, since that information will all directly be transferred into the online FAFSA form using the direct transfer from the IRS. A couple other benefits to filing that FAFSA online. It's going to allow for a more timely submission of that application. So doing the FAFSA form online is going to ensure that it can get processed by the federal government as soon as possible. There's also more detailed instructions and help sections for questions that have common issues that students run into. There will be little boxes that students can click that will allow for more in-depth information for help with certain questions. By doing the form online, you can also check the status of that application in the online federal aid system as well, which is super helpful. And the whole thing in general is just much simpler if students use the online FAFSA form. Moving into actually getting started on that FAFSA form and getting into the online systems that you'll use for the FAFSA throughout your entire time as a student. The first step for both students and parents is going to be to create what's called the FSA ID. And this will be an online account that you'll use, again, your entire time that you're a student and you're going through the financial aid process from your first year all the way through to your last year in school. This online FSA ID is going to be what you'll log into every single time you want to go access the FAFSA or you want to access other U.S. Department of Education websites. So make sure students and parents both get in, create their own FSA ID. Make sure you keep your password information down somewhere. If folks forget passwords, thankfully, the process for going through and resetting access to that account is pretty simple, but make sure that you create this FSA ID so that you can start getting in to complete that FAFSA form. Once you have created that FSA ID, you'll be able to log in, and then once you're in studentaid.gov, generally, more often than not, the page that you're on is going to point you towards whatever the current FAFSA to complete for that upcoming school year is. So right now, when you log into FSA, you get into your student aid ID with your information that you set up with your passcode. It'll prompt you to start a 2025-26 FAFSA form. For folks who are starting fall 2025, you'll want to make sure that you are completing that 2025-26 FAFSA form. The 2024-25 FAFSA is still available, so just make sure you're selecting the option to complete that 2025-26 FAFSA online. Once you get into the form, first thing it's going to ask you is who is starting the form. So whether you are a student or whether you're the parent of a student who's going to be completing the FAFSA, just make sure you select whichever is applicable, and then it'll prompt you to continue throughout the form with entering the relevant information. Next, the form is going to tell you that depending on how you answer to certain questions on the form, there are potentially going to be contributors, meaning there will be other folks who will need to add information to your FAFSA form for it to be processed correctly. So make sure once you get to this screen, you read through the whole thing. It'll outline the process for how contributors get that information onto the FAFSA, which eventually you'll come to a page where you enter information for that contributor, and then they'll get an email invite notice to their FSA ID information for how to get in and complete the FAFSA using their information. One of the recent changes to the online FAFSA form is the direct data exchange with the IRS regarding tax information. So what this allows for is individual federal tax info to be directly transferred from the IRS into that online FAFSA form. Consent is required by all contributors on the FAFSA for this information to get directly transferred. Once students get to information or parents get to information regarding entering tax information, they'll go through this process and then it will directly input this information using the direct data exchange. This eliminates the need for manual entry of tax and income information and can help avoid errors regarding what year tax information is getting pulled from, as well as data entry on the actual FAFSA form. Next, if the student is starting the form, it'll prompt them to enter a couple different types of information as they go through the beginning. It'll ask for identity and contact information for the student. It'll go through and again, like I mentioned previously, ask for consent for the transfer of that tax information from the IRS. It'll ask regarding the student's marital status, their college plans, and then any personal and unusual circumstances, which we'll talk about in the next couple slides. Regarding how students answer certain questions on the previous slides as they go through the form, students will come to a section that will tell them what their dependency status should be on that FAFSA based on how they enter certain information. This dependency status dictates whose info needs to be on that FAFSA, right? So whether parent information for dependent students need to be on that FAFSA. An important thing to note, because I run into this question every single year, is this idea of dependency and independent exists totally separate from whether students are claimed as dependents on parents' actual tax information. So completely different type of criteria once students are completing that FAFSA. So as you go through the form, it will tell you what information is needed or what information is not needed regarding parents of students. Depending on the different types of situations, some students may have what, for FAFSA purposes, are called unusual circumstances. And these are conditions that justify an institution to make an adjustment to a student's dependency status, meaning that the student does not have to provide parental data on that FAFSA form and is considered an independent student. In this situation, there will be an option that will allow students to mark unusual circumstances on that FAFSA, and then those students will need to make sure they're working with individual colleges that they're interested in to go through whatever the process is for schools confirming that the student's dependency status is correct. Once students go through and enter the information that determines that they're going to be needing to invite a parent to complete an enter form on that FAFSA, the student will invite the parent as a contributor on that FAFSA form, like I mentioned towards the start of this presentation. So the student will provide personal information for that parent and then invite them to complete their section of the FAFSA form to make sure that everything gets processed and completed correctly. Students will then come to the section of the form where they enter any financial information regarding themselves, right? So if students potentially filed taxes for 2023 for this upcoming FAFSA year, then students would enter that information here and it would be directly transferred from the IRS. Students will also be able to enter information regarding assets, so things like any savings or investments that they might have regarding their own personal financial circumstances. From here, students will enter what colleges they would like FAFSA information to be sent to. So what this looks like is students will come to a screen that will have them enter colleges. You can either look up an institution by name or using what's called their federal school code for the FAFSA. Each school has a code. Most often it can be found online. If you can't find the information, reach out to the school's admission or financial aid office. They'll know the code. However, most schools can be found just by searching either geographically or by the school's actual name in the college selection screen. Then it'll have students review the entirety of the information that they entered. Always, always, always recommend that students actually do review this information just to make sure that nothing got missed. Finally, students will provide an electronic signature, and then their section of the form will be complete. And then if only they were required to enter information, the FAFSA form will be complete. But if the form determined that students needed a contributor on that FAFSA, it will be considered incomplete until the contributor provides that info and signs the FAFSA as well. If the form did determine that the student needs a contributor's information on the FAFSA for it to be processed, what will happen then is that email invitation will get sent to the parent telling them that they need to get in and complete a portion of the student's FAFSA form online. From here, parents will log in using their own individual FSA ID that they created to access their student's online FAFSA form. Just like with the student section, it'll go through and prompt the parent to enter identity and contact information. It'll also, again, ask the parent for consent to transfer that IRS data into the FAFSA. It'll ask for info about the parent's marital status, and then also some information about the parent's state of legal residence. Parents will then come to the section of the FAFSA that will ask them for information regarding their financials. So this will be information regarding the parent's tax filing status, family size and number in college, tax return information. So again, info that's going to be directly transferred from the IRS, asset information, just like it asked for the student. And then if parents have filed jointly, it will ask for other parent information, or if parents are married and filed separately, it will also ask for other parent financial information to be input on the FAFSA to make sure that it has all of the relevant information for the student. After the parent completes all of their information, it will again show a review of everything that was entered up until that point. Make sure parents go through and review this information to make sure that everything looks correct. And then finally, it will ask for a signature and submission of that FAFSA form on the parent's FSA ID, just like it did for the student's information as well. If the student completed that FAFSA form portion first, and the parent goes through and signs and submits this FAFSA, this will finalize the form so that it can be processed by the federal government and determine what that student aid index or SAI will be. A couple other considerations as students and parents go through and fill out the FAFSA information to consider. If independent students are married, so if a student is considered an independent because they are a married student, spouse information for that student will be required on that FAFSA form as well. Like I mentioned a few times, consent to transfer that tax information from the IRS is required for all contributors on that FAFSA form. So this includes students, student spouse, parent, and other parent if applicable to the student situations. Again, students, parents may all start and complete and submit a FAFSA in whatever order works best, right? So as you go through that screen at the start of the FAFSA, where it asks you if you're a parent or a student, just make sure you're selecting whoever is actually starting that FAFSA form as you go through the process. When the FAFSA form asks for information about family size, I like to include this information just so folks know who is going to be considered in this family size number that the FAFSA form is asking for. So for dependent students, this will be the student, their parent, and potentially a spouse if applicable, parents' dependent children, even if they are currently in school, off at college, and don't live at home. And then also other people if they live full-time with the parent. So whether this be other family members, this is grandparents, those folks are also going to be considered in the family size for dependent students. For independent students, this is going to be themselves, potentially a spouse, the student's dependent children, again, even if they are off at college and don't live with them full-time, and then also other people, again, if they live full-time with the student, just like with dependent students.
Once the FAFSA is completed and an SAI can be calculated, the information then gets sent both to every individual school that students have added to that FAFSA, as well as sent to the student with a summary of all of their FAFSA information that was entered.
In studentaid.gov, students will be able to view their FAFSA submission summary. From this screen, they'll be able to get an eligibility overview of the potential federal aid that they may be eligible for. They'll be able to show the answers that they put into different questions on that FAFSA form. They'll have the school information for schools that they put on that FAFSA as well. And then finally, a next steps tab to show what students can do now that they've completed the FAFSA and sent that information off to schools. In the top right here, there also is the option to print this page to view the FAFSA submission summary in a paper form. If students need to make corrections to any information that they entered onto that FAFSA, corrections can be made by logging into the FSA ID to get into that online FAFSA and start what's called Make a Correction to update that online form. Students can update paper FAFSA forms by sending an updated paper FAFSA submission summary to the documented address for studentaid.gov, or students can submit documentation to individual colleges' financial aid offices if there's any documentation that they need to make any changes on their end at the school. An important thing to note is that there are options for schools to factor in additional special circumstances if information on the FAFSA isn't reflective of a student or a family's actual financial circumstances. We'll talk a little bit about what some of these things can be on the next slide, but know that this option is here if you do want schools to review the information that is on that FAFSA. Students should contact individual schools' financial aid offices for information on what this process looks like, because it can vary from institution to institution. This slide here shows a couple different circumstances that schools can factor into as special circumstances, whether it's the death of a parent or spouse, unusual uncovered medical or dental expenses throughout the last couple years, loss of employment or income, extraordinary dependent care, divorce, secondary school tuition, or additional family members in college. These are things that some schools can factor into when making financial aid decisions. So if there's anything on here that you would like schools to consider, please reach out to them and ask what their process is for factoring in these different circumstances into building financial aid packages. Thank you for listening to this brief overview of the process of getting that FAFSA completed and sent off to individual schools that you'd like to have your financial aid information. As you go through the form, or if you have any individual questions about financial aid, please reach out to us here at the Financial Aid Office at Pacific University. You can reach us using this information here down at the bottom of the screen, or stop by the office in person if you are local to the area. Let us know if you have any questions in regards to financial aid or getting this FAFSA completed, and stay in touch with us as you continue throughout the financial aid process. Thank you.